So welcome everyone to our event today, Book Banning and Best Response Strategies. I'm Linda Marie Barrett, Executive Director of the Southern Independent Booksellers Alliance. During the last year, SIBA bookstores have reported widespread efforts to ban books. Stores are experiencing pressures in their communities, including online communities, to not carry, not display, not promote in any form certain books. Many of these books are by BIPOC and LGBTQ authors, and they are often the same books, the same authors over and over. Authors are telling us that they and their works are being erased. Our panel today addresses this situation. We'll hear from Penn about what's happening and trending nationally and in our territory. And we'll also learn some practical and effective strategies to deal with online harassment, which is on the increase. And we'll hear from 3 SIBA booksellers on the front lines in Arkansas, Louisiana, and Florida. The panelists want to hear your questions, so please put your questions in the Q&A. If we run out of time and can't answer your questions during the webinar, we'll forward them to the panelists and follow up with answers in an upcoming newsletter. And now to introduce our panelists. Sabrina Baeta is a program consultant with Freedom to Read at PEN America. She engages in research and awareness building around censorship attacks on public education, especially as it relates to literature accessibility in libraries and classrooms. She is a poet, essayist, and writer. Prior to PEN America, she worked in educational publishing and in a variety of performing arts and education nonprofits. She will be our panel moderator. Thank you so much, Sabrina. Jeje Mohammed is the Senior Manager for Digital Safety and Free Expression at PEN America. She oversees the training program and resource development for journalists, academics, and writers to defend themselves against online harassment. She provides training, practical tools, and strategies for journalists and activists on trauma-informed and identity-aware digital safety, physical safety, de-escalation, and psychological first aid. She has worked as a journalist in Egypt and in the United States and produced documentaries and podcasts focusing on human rights abuses in both places. Thank you for being here for our bookseller, Jeje. DJ Johnson is a visionary entrepreneur, community leader, and advocate for social change. As the founder of Baldwin & Company, NOLA Art Bar, and Baldwin & Company Foundation in New Orleans, DJ has established a legacy of creating vibrant community hubs and intellectual centers where individuals from diverse backgrounds come together in a welcoming and supportive environment. Recognizing the pressing need for social change and the disparities faced by Black communities, DJ established the Baldwin & Company Foundation. Through this foundation, DJ is developing and implementing programs that directly address income and employment disparities in Black communities across the country. Thank you so much for being here, DJ. Candy West purchased the majority ownership of Wordsworth Books in Little Rock, Arkansas, earlier this year. Wordsworth Books is a general interest bookstore that has been serving the central Arkansas community for over 30 years in its current location. With an education background in finance and business and a former career in project management, Candy is enjoying finding ways to use her skills and her passion for books and reading to build upon the legacy of Wordsworth's service to the local literary community. Thank you for being here, Candy. And now we introduce possibly the hardest working bookseller in the business, Mitchell Kaplan. Mitchell is a native of Miami Beach and opened the first Books and Books in Coral Gables, Florida in 1982. With 4 South Florida locations, Books and Books hosts over 400 events per year. Among his honors, Mitchell served as president of the American Booksellers Association, and he received the Literarian Award from the National Book Foundation. Books and Books was also Publishers Weekly Bookstore of the Year. He now serves on the board of the National Coalition Against Censorship. He is a co-founder of the Miami Book Fair and with his partner, Paula Mazur, established the Mazur Kaplan Company to bring books to the screen, both film and television. Mitchell also hosts the podcast, The Literary Life with Mitchell Kaplan, broadcast from Miami. Thank you so much for being here, Mitchell. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sabrina to moderate.
Thank you so much for that intro. All of them so prolific. I love being able to get that context into everyone's backgrounds as well. So I get to do that Zoom thing of asking you if you can see my screen, and those on camera, if you could just give me a thumbs up when it comes up. Yeah. Yeah, perfect. So I'm here to talk about book bans. I'm here to show off Penn's research for this, but I also just want to start with, I grew up in Central Florida, so I give presentations all over the country, but this is one of the ones I'm most excited for because your locations are my home. If you know Seminole County, Florida, the bookstores there and the libraries there, what shaped my childhood. So really excited to be able to be talking to some hometown groups, but also just talking to some Southerners as well. So like was mentioned, I'm with Pen America, which conducts research on banned books and what's happening with banned books across the country. And that's what I'm going to be reporting on. So a little background. We stand at the intersection of literature and human rights to protect free expression. So we have both domestic programs and look at international work as well. We celebrated our 100 years recently, so we've been around a while, but we've always been about protecting stories, especially in difficult times. So we've done this before, we'll continue to do this, but we're really proud to be able to continue this work in protecting authors and their stories and the readers who need those stories. So I'm the data person at Penn, so just bear with me a little bit when I give you a little bit of methodology, and I promise you that I'm going to have a lot of numbers to present to you, but then Jeje and our booksellers are going to have much more interesting contextual information, but I'm just going to let you know where the trends and what we're seeing throughout the country with book bans. Specifically, what I look at are school book bans. So that's K through 12 public education, and we define a school book ban as any diminished access to a previously accessible book that was pulled, removed, restricted based on its content. So what that means and how we can contextualize that is that, yes, I'm looking at the specific group of K through 12 public education, but those same trends, those same patterns are being, replicated across public libraries, are the same reason for intimidation for booksellers trying to shelve their own books. So the same topics that we see here are still being repeated elsewhere. So what does that look like over the last 2 years? You can see here that from 2021 to 2021, 2022 to 2022, 2023, there was a large increase in book bans from that 2,500 number to that 3,300 number that you see there. And really, this has only grown in scope. We're already doing the research and the tracking for this next year, and unfortunately, book banning has only continued. We only see more instances, and continuing in places that you've heard of, but in states really across the country. People seem to think there's a concentration of this in certain places in the United States, but really it's everywhere. Across the 2 years, there are 41 states that have banned books in their schools. So this really is a nationwide problem that we're witnessing. The books that are banned, you'll probably see some familiar titles here. You'll probably see titles that are in your own stores, ones that you've read before, ones that you may have read 20 years ago, ones that you may have read 2 years ago. So you can see that there's a large scope of both topics, but the type of books. We see poetry books, we see fiction books, we see nonfiction books. There's a large, widespread net that is capturing all of this. So yes, we're going to look at some topic areas at what kind of content is being banned, but I like to point that out because I think it'd be really hard to write a book that doesn't cover one of the topics, right? So just something to keep in mind. And you probably see some favorites of some of the people coming into your stores as well there. So I teased the content, and here it is. And this is usually one of the big areas that people like to focus on. So you see that there are themes or instances of violence and physical abuse, topics on health and well-being for students. That first category includes sexual assault. The second one includes sexual education. And then followed by sexual experiences between characters. And then the last one, I'm going to skip the 2 identity ones and go to themes of grief and death, because a lot of times these topics are plugged as difficult topics. They're plugged as, items that make people uncomfortable, and that's the reason they're getting banned. But like I mentioned, I think it'd be hard to write a book that didn't deal with didn't touch on at least one of these topics. And a lot of times these are being presented because they're difficult, because they're topics that people need a soft introduction through a book to. So I think the first time you see this, it can be kind of uncomfortable to see, but I think for a lot of us, the first time we've been able to grapple with these issues, or how we've been able to grapple with these issues if we had to meet it in real life first, was through a book, and how important it is to have that avenue. And it's especially important that if our schools are no longer providing this to students, where can they get this knowledge? If public libraries are under attack, that you are the line of defense. You're the only ones who are carrying this content. And even bigger than that, you'll see that 30% and 30% for characters of color and themes of race and racism, and LGBTQ characters or themes. This is an outsized attack on those groupings, right? Not, we know that 30% of books in a school library are not this representative. So having that focus on these identities is an outsized attack on them. One of the things too, this is just within the last year. It's actually a larger percentage within the last 2 years. Because once a book gets pulled, my research does not follow that carryover. It doesn't count it again within the next year. So if there's books, we're just working on diversifying our libraries, and those books were just made available, then when they get pulled and they're not available the next year, they're not getting replaced with similar content, right? And it's important that students have that representation, both for themselves, but also for the communities that they're going to be engaging with, for their friends, to be able to grapple with this and experiences that are the same as their own and that are mirrors to that, or that are different than their own, through these materials. And what, better way to do that than with a book, a cheap, accessible resource. So where are the book bans occurring? You see here that there's 153 districts in 33 states within the last year, academic year. Florida tops that list, unfortunately, my home state of Florida, and I know there's a lot of representatives here from Florida as well, followed by Texas, Missouri, Utah, and Pennsylvania. So you'll see some either neighboring states or states that fall into the locations that we'll be talking about today. But I did want to get a little bit more focused on where I know everyone is from. Here you'll see a map where there's an angry red over Florida. But I want to point out that so many states are implicated in this, states that you may not expect, states that you think, okay, why was this following? And that I want you to grapple with why that is. What is really behind a book ban? Why is it affecting the entire country? Is it about, state governments? Is it about the makeup of the different counties at the local level? Like I mentioned, Florida specifically, it right now has 42% of all of the bans happening in the entire country. How does it happen that one state with 33 districts, which by the way, that's almost half, I think, of all of the school districts in Florida. So how does that occur? Well, there's this mounting pressure on schools to censor, and it's coming from advocacy groups and legislation. So it's coming both from the bottom at the kind of grassroots level and from the top, from the state governments. And you'll see here that 13 states within our 33 had relevant legislation that was leading to censorship, but 33, all of them have these advocacy groups present. And these advocacy groups, what they're advocating for is the censorship of these materials. I should say that. So you can see, though, that 87% of the bans occurred in a district where there was this group activity calling for the bans, or the group was in the neighboring district. And 63%, so only 13 out of the 33 have the relevant legislation. But of those 13, 63% of all the bans that occurred happened in those states. So the legislation really supercharges what's happening at the local level. So to help round off before I pass it on to Jeje in 2 slides, I wanted to give you all context of what's happening in your own state. So these are the states covered, right? And you'll see that Florida is there with a lot of bans. And you'll see that a lot of them, it's kind of like a mid-level of bans. So Virginia might be an unexpected one. It usually is for people. As North Carolina, South Carolina. And for those Louisiana and Alabama reporting no bans, I'll say that we rely on public reporting. There have to be people who are keeping an eye on this, and there has to be some kind of local reporting, or school, districts will put out, their district websites will put out the books that have been challenged and banned. So no reported bans does not necessarily mean, if you're thinking, no, wait, there was a ban that happened here. One, maybe email me and tell me about it. But two, it doesn't necessarily mean, I can with a lot of confidence say that this is happening everywhere, but there's so much soft censorship. There's so much silent censorship. If somebody goes and pulls a book off a shelf, it's not reported, there's no way for us to know. The districts are not calling me up and saying, hi, Sabrina, we actually just banned 10 books. Do you want to include that in your index? So it really relies, so much has to happen for us to even be aware of the problem. So I encourage you to be really aware of what's happening in your local communities, especially as book lovers. This is just an issue for us all to keep an eye out on. I wanted one more slide. So I know from doing presentations with booksellers, some of the things that I hear about are a lot about their concerns are increased online harassment, especially social media, right? Facebook pages, those comment sections have become just places of fear and intimidation for a lot of people. Hate speech and doxing, and Jeje will go a little bit into this, but using language that maybe a few years ago you would have never seen available, both in person and online. And a lot of places, especially places where the book banning activity has not been happening as much, they want to help, but they don't know exactly how they can help their local communities and act as allies. So we're going to give some good concrete examples coming up here on how to do that, but I'll allow my other panelists to be able to do that and introduce Jeje for this next portion of the presentation.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. Thank you, really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for being here. And as we're all aware of the struggles that everyone is going through now, specifically talking about topics or books that others want to censor. And I want to start by definitely giving you some practical tips on how to protect yourself from hacking and doxing and online abuse and how to navigate it. But the first thing to start with is to start with definition. And the way we define online abuse at PEN America is that it's the repeated or severe targeting of an individual or group online through harmful behavior. And in this definition, there are a couple of things that are important. It is definitely harmful behavior. It is not with good intent. And the other two things about this definition is that when we say severe, we're talking about possibly one incident of abuse only, but it has really terrifying consequences. Like, for example, doxing, someone publishing my home address and threatening me or asking others to harm me. The other part of this definition is when we say repeated, and repeated, we're talking about the volume, the amount of things that people receive. Incidents on their own might not actually annoy you or bother you, but because of the volume of things you're receiving, it counts as abuse. And the reason we make sure to include both is that we don't really have to wait for the worst case scenarios when it comes to online harassment and online abuse for it to count as abuse, but other forms count as abuse. And we're going to talk about some of the tactics. If we can go to the next slide. Thank you. One more. Thank you. The first tactic is when we're talking about hateful speech. It's very self-explanatory, nothing exactly to explain here other than that it targets the identity or the intersectional identities of individuals. So it targets race, ethnicity, gender, religion, sexual orientation, disability, and other factors. A lot of the times as well, it's perceived identities, not necessarily actually true. The second thing is threats. And when we're talking about threats, it's threats of physical violence. And in the incidents and the cases with women and non-binary individuals, it's threats of sexual violence. And it is to intimidate and silence someone. Then we talk about cyber mobs. And when we say cyber mobs, it's coordinated attacks by a group to overwhelm someone with the barrage of threats and slurs. And sometimes it seems that they're not really connected, but they are, for the most part, connected, and they are coordinated. And the other thing is doxing, which I mentioned in the definition. And it's the publishing of sensitive personal information online without your consent. And it is to intimidate, steal identity, threaten someone. And this information can be something like home address. It can be something like private phone number, private email address, the school where someone's kids go to, and things like that. Then we have online impersonation. And with online impersonation, it's someone creates a fake account using my picture, using my name, pretending to be me, publish horrible things online to get me in trouble, to defame me, to discredit me, or to get me fired. Then we talk about message bombing as a tactic, which is what I mentioned in the definition earlier. And with message bombing, it's someone flooding your accounts or your devices with useless things to the point that you cannot access important information. For example, if someone is calling me or texting me like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times a day, to the point that I cannot use my phone anymore, that counts as abuse. There's a very well-known tactic that is being used a lot, specifically with journalists, is that trolls subscribe journalists to porn sites and other sites so that they receive hundreds of emails that buries important information and emails within that. So that if someone is trying to hack an account that I have and I receive this notification that like there is an attempt of login from a different device, I lose it. So it's actually a very sneaky way of doing that. Then one of the other tactics is non-consensual intimate images, and it's the distribution of private or manufactured sexually explicit images and videos without consent. And it's also to defame or discredit someone. Some people call it revenge porn, but we do not like using that term because it's not porn, even though it could be for revenge, but it isn't porn. Then we have gendered disinformation, and it is attacking someone based on their gender identity by spreading deceptive or inaccurate information and images about them. Now, let's quickly talk about the scope of online abuse. This is a study done by YouGov and ADL that shows how widespread online abuse and online harassment is in the US. They surveyed people in the US and they found that in 2023, 52% of respondents have said that they have faced online harassment. That is compared to 40% last year in 2022. This is how sharp the increase is. And 37% have said that they've experienced severe harassment compared to 27% last year. And that's not the only thing. If we can go to the next slide. Not everyone is actually affected by online abuse the same way or attacked for the same reason. The different types of identities that we hold, specifically if we have multiple layers of identities, it gets more complex. And unfortunately, these, like as individuals, we become more targeted online. As you can see from the screen, people from specific ethnic backgrounds are targeted more. In this case, in that result, African Americans and Black individuals are targeted more online than any other people. Add to that layers of, for example, if a Black queer woman or a Black queer man, then this is, unfortunately, they're targeted more and more because of their identity. So it's not only because of the work that they're doing. It's not only because like I am covering this issue or I'm talking about this issue, but because of who I am as an individual, I am being targeted online. Now, we discussed the definitions, tactics, and the scope. Let's talk about some practical tips, some simple stuff that we can do in our daily life to actually make it harder for someone to hack our accounts or dox us. And the first thing is to practice something called password hygiene. And what we mean by that is that each of your passwords should be unique. So do not repeat the same password for multiple accounts. They should be at least 16 plus characters. And we recommend phrases. All the people in this room love written words. You can use poetry for your passwords. You can use lines from books. You can use lines from songs. Add to it numbers and make it complicated and complex, and a unique one for each of your accounts. This makes it way harder for someone to figure out your account because there are softwares online that are actually not expensive at all that can, with a guessing game, they can figure out what the password is. Then to pick up difficult answers to your security questions. Lie to computers because you are not going to hurt their feelings and no one actually cares. Where do you live? I live in Mars. No one cares. What was your first pet? A shark. Honestly, no one cares. The only thing is that it's not answers that are Googleable. So it's very hard for someone to guess that my pet was a shark, for example. So you can always do that. And the reason is the security questions that verify your identity, for example, are normally something like, what's your mother's maiden name? And it's super easy to find this information online. Or what's the name of your favorite pet? It is very, very easy to find this information online. So we just want to limit the amount of information that people can access and can use to figure out more information about us. The other thing that we also recommend is that for you to get a password manager, because now I'm saying that we need unique, complex passwords. We need to create lies for all of these questions. How can we remember all of that? And this is where a password manager comes handy. A password manager, think of it as a vault that you can save your information there encrypted. And so it's like a scramble. It doesn't make any sense unless you have the key to unlock that and decrypt them. And there are millions of password managers out there, but not all of them are good enough because you need to use something that is secure and encrypted. The ones we have on the screen are very recommended, like Bitwarden, Dashlane, and 1Password. So you can use them to generate passwords that are strong and complex. You can use them to save your password, to save the answers to your security questions, and any other important information that you have. One other tip as well is that to add an additional lock to your account. And what I mean by that is think of the combination of your password and username and password as the first lock on your door. If this fails, how can we protect ourselves with an additional lock? This is where we recommend people to enable two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication on as many of their accounts as possible, because it literally serves as an additional lock on your door. And there are a couple of ways you can do that. There is one that you can use your phone number and SMS, which we do not really recommend that much because of something called SIM jacking. And SIM jacking is someone calling your phone company, pretending to be you, and asking them to reroute traffic to another device or another number. So they will have access to your SMSs and they will have access to your phone calls. And the way to protect yourself from that is to call your phone company and asking them to set a PIN on your mobile account. So no one can make any changes to your number without your consent or without you providing this PIN. Now, let's go back to the two-factor authentications, the other methods. We talked about phone number and why we do not really recommend it. Another thing that you can use is the use of an authentication app, something like Google Authenticator or Auth0. And they are applications that generate random numbers that expire. So they keep you secure. And the last method is to use a physical key, something called the YubiKey. And this is an example of it, which is not really clear, but this is an example of it. It's the most secure, but honestly, it's not needed unless you have a very high risk while you're doing your job. So using an authentication app is sufficient enough. Just make sure to save your backup codes somewhere safe. One thing that we always talk to people about is if you get out of this specific talk about digital safety and online harassment with one thing, is to actually how we change our mindset about how we use our information online, where we post it and why. So we always recommend that people separate the personal and the professional. Keep your private life private and keep your public life public. In a way, be intentional about the type of information you're posting and on which. If I am using my Twitter account, X, mainly for work, I tend to not share any personal information there because that makes me vulnerable online. And if I'm using my Instagram account for personal uses, I lock it down. It's very private. It's very secure. And I don't add anyone there that I don't know personally because I don't trust people knowing more information about me. So it's more about being intentional, being careful about what type of information we're adding where. It doesn't have to be that you have two separate accounts of everything. It's just that you know what you're posting and who the audience would be for that and who will have access to that. Can we go to... Now, the question that we always receive is like, how can we support each other and how can we be good allies? There are a couple of things that you can do. Before online abuse, we can prepare for online abuse by establishing a supportive cyber community. For example, creating a rapid response team seems complicated, but it's really just like having 3 to 5 people, close, trusted contacts that I can reach out to if something happens. Because online abuse is very isolating, can be very, very isolating, and can be very traumatic. So having someone or a group of people that we can reach out to is very important. Another thing is to reach out to the larger cyber community that we have. Friends and families, some people from conferences or anything like that, or from any type of work that we have. We all have different cyber communities that we were introduced to one way or another. We can reach out to them and ask them for support. For example, if there is an impersonation account using my name and photo, I can actually ask them to report this account on my behalf. If we can go to the next slide. And these are some of the things that allies can do. You can support someone by monitoring, reporting, and documenting on social media on their behalf, so they can take a break and take care of their mental health and well-being. You can amplify original posts or something that, for example, if someone is making sure that a book is there, even though they're trying to be censored and they're getting attacks because of that, highlighting and amplifying that is something very important. The great work that everyone is doing. Rallying supportive communities is very, very important, specifically if you need people to stand up for you, if you need people to report on your behalf, to help you document things that you're receiving, it's very important. There is also reclaiming a negative hashtag, and we saw that with something similar to what happened with the Proud Boys a couple of years ago. And it just like to flood it with positive messages and change the narrative around it. Then also leveraging influence and privilege and power. For example, in fact-checking false claims. If you have a connection to someone in a social media company, reach out to them and things like that. This is, I believe, the last slide that we have. And these are some other things that you can do. Vigilante reporting is one of my favorite fun, nerdy activity that I do. Whenever I'm scrolling through social media and I see someone receiving online abuse, I just report the content on their behalf because it's not something that is public facing at all as well. So it's private, you can do, and no one will actually know that you did, but it will help the algorithm pay attention to that content to be removed. Anything else, please make sure to check with the individual first before doing anything public. Check on them, ask them, check what they need. Sometimes we have energy to say that I want to stand up against this and I refuse to, or I reject this, what's happening. But other times, sometimes I just feel like I want to hide under my blanket and be left alone. Both are totally fine. So just check with the individual what they need and follow their lead. And if you decide to do anything public facing, please make sure to check your cybersecurity first, your own cybersecurity first, because you might become a target yourself. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Jeje, for all that wonderful information, how people can keep themselves and others safe. I'll go right along and we can hear some from DJ, our first bookseller talking today.
Hey, how's it going? Thank you for the opportunity. I really want to say thank you to you all for this platform, the honor and the pleasure to be able to speak about book bans. Of course, it's prevalent in our society right now. You mentioned earlier that it's 41 different states that have the legislation on the books right now banning books. And part of the reason why it's so important for myself and involved in the company as a mission is just that banning books, you know, it's a threat to our American democracy, just in how it infringes upon the principles of free speech and intellectual freedom. In the democracy, we want to exchange ideas and create diverse and discourse and perspectives. Is just crucial for citizenry. And we've seen this for me, particularly from the Black community. We've seen this type of censorship before, and we've seen how it impacts us. So when it comes to book bans, you know, limiting access to different viewpoints and stifling discourse, it hinders our free flow of being able to progress as a society. You know, for me, and I think, and I speak for the majority of people in America, just democracy thrives on the ability for individuals to make informed decisions and to expose themselves to various different ideas, and even if they may be deemed controversial, it's just essential for critical thinking. And that's one of the things that Baldwin and Company wants to do is strive to promote critical thinking skills. And just so some of the things that we've been doing at Baldwin and Company to fight against book bans in an effort to uphold the principles of free speech and intellectual freedom is just making sure our community stay engaged, stay informed, making sure that we have a diverse inventory, educating the community, collaborating with authors in terms of author talks and being able to bring in some of the most prominent thought leaders into our community, creating a safe space. Baldwin Company, it's that intellectual hub. It's that cultivation of creativity and that incubation for intellectual discovery, where people feel safe being able to have these tough discussions. We want to encourage discussions and raise awareness. That's the only way that we can work through some of these pressing issues, and just lobby for legislation, just like the opposition is lobbying for legislation. I think we have to continue to get schools involved with libraries and be vocal in showing our support, because the individuals are very small who are initiating these book bans. It's a very small segment. So the majority of Americans are actually for the exchange of information, and they want individuals to be exposed to a variety of ideas, and they don't believe in the book bans. But I think one of the things that our duty as a community leader is to make sure that we're galvanizing the efforts of everyone to make sure that our voice is heard more loudly than the very few who are right now trying to increase censorship of this information. Yeah. And I think we just have to be, we have to make sure that we're careful, because we've seen government overreach before, and I think this is a gross example of government overreach and the potential for abuse of power. And I just think it's essential to the need to protect certain values, with the importance of preserving fundamental democracy principles for a free and open society.
Yeah, thank you so much, DJ. And I love how much, the connections between what you're doing with the schools and the libraries, and the fact that you all have the shared value of that free exchange of information. That'll be resonating with me for a while. But now we can hear from Candy.
Hi, thanks for asking me to join. I wanted to just start out by saying that I was pretty much plunged into this when I purchased the store in January. And although I had was against book bans, I would always read a banned book if I heard it was banned. This has been a real learning for us at the store. The Arkansas legislature back in March passed a law, and the governor signed it, to make it a crime if harmful material was provided to minors. The act was really focused on, it was targeted at librarians. The way it was worded, part of it is also about how books are selected in libraries. And so it was honestly just a poorly worded act in the first place, very vague. Harmful to minors is not described. We were aware of it at the store, but we, and we were thinking about it and how it might apply to us, but we hadn't gotten very far until the Central Arkansas Library System reached out and asked us to join a lawsuit against what is ultimately prosecuting attorneys for each state in Arkansas to initially enjoin that an injunction to enact it. It was supposed to go, the law was supposed to go into effect on August 1st. So we ended up, our bookstore, a couple of other bookstores in Arkansas, the ABA joined the suit, Authors Guild. I'm going to forget some of the people because it ended up to be several parties, filed a suit around Memorial Day. The ultimate decision in that, it was enjoined. We're kind of in the part where it can be appealed, but that law did not go into effect based on us filing that lawsuit. So that's all great. Some other things that happened around that, of course, that I had to think about as a bookseller, and I'm just going to talk from an owner of a bookstore standpoint. I had just purchased the store. The store is 30 years old. So I was already, it's a legacy you're trying to uphold. We didn't know how the public would react to us being part of this lawsuit. We didn't know if we would then be targeted. At that time, we had received no backlash on any book we had on the shelves. We have all kinds of books that have been banned on the shelves, as everybody does. We'd received no online harassment, nothing. So for myself, and I have two other minority owners, one of the things we had to think about is, what are we opening up? We're opening up a can of worms by being part of that. And ultimately we decided there's very little you can do as a small business owner and, as an individual, but this was something we could do to stand up to it. And we knew going in, there might be financial ramifications of that. So we went into it knowing that. Luckily, no, we've had nothing but positive feedback. We've had no online harassment. We've had nothing but customers coming in asking if they could, if we had a GoFundMe for our, for our legal fees, and we don't. We're being represented pro bono by a firm out of New York, and who is doing a wonderful job for us. And this is all happening free of charge to us. So, anyway, just giving our side of the story. Who knows? It could be very different 6 months from now. It could be different in a different state. But for us, we really didn't see that pushback that we thought might happen. The ABA was wonderful in prepping us for if that happened. We have talking points for our staff. We have, we're prepped. One of the first things we did, and the weekend that we filed the lawsuit, we filed right before Memorial Day weekend, and the ABA got on the phone with me and said, you need to take your staff photos off the site. You need to take anything that I would have never thought of that, but just keeping them from being targeted was important to me. So one of the most important things in the whole thing was protecting my staff and not, they did not make the decision to file this lawsuit. I made that decision and I wanted to protect them. But so we did take our bios off our website. We tried to scrub a little bit of anything about booksellers that could be targeted. But we didn't have anything happen. And we still might, as if the lawsuit is appealed and as if there's more, things that happen with that, we know that might be coming, but it hasn't happened so far. Community-wide, we've gotten much more interest in, what books do you have on the shelves? What should I read? So our feedback has been more like, how can we, in our customer base, most independent bookstores have a fairly liberal customer base, and we definitely do, particularly for being in Arkansas, which is a more conservative state. We have a very liberal customer base. But we've started a banned book club at the store with, in fact, we meet for the second time tonight, and there are 50 people signed up for that. So on our side, we've seen nothing but positive results. We know that could change at any point. We're prepared for it. And I think that's all I'll say in the interest of time, but happy to answer any questions about other specific things we've done.
Yeah, sounds like some wonderful work. You said there's not a lot that, an independent business owner can do, but it sounds like you're doing a lot, and like there's a community need you're filling if 50 people are coming to your banned book club. So I mean, it sounds like a lot of book lovers really need that space, as well as all of the other actions you're taking. So thank you, Candy. And with that, I'll leave it to our last panelist, Mitchell.
I I too want to thank Seba and Penn for inviting me to be part of this and for putting this on for people in our region. And I want to single out DJ and Candy for the great work that they're doing. And booksellers all throughout this region, all throughout the country, who are kind of at the vanguard of this. I know bookstores throughout Florida are fighting the good fight to make sure up and down the state that that these people don't get away with it. I thought I would try to put in perspective why Florida right now has as many book bans as it does. It's interesting. I grew up, I'm a native Floridian, native from South Florida. It wasn't always the case that books were being banned. In fact, if you look at my curriculum when I was a high school student back in the 70s, I bet that 90% of those books would not pass muster today, right? And I turned out pretty well. The issue is that, as a 40-year bookseller, we have faced book banning throughout the years, and people trying to pressure us not to carry certain things. A very perfect example is what happened with Salman Rushdie's book Satanic Verses. That was a book in which there was an incredible amount of pressure on independent bookstores not to carry it. And we were fighting that. And we carry a lot of art books. We were fighting the Robert Mapplethorpe fight not to carry that. There was also this book years ago on Madonna that came in a cellophane wrapping that you couldn't open. And there were nude photographs of Madonna, and people were fighting that. Judy Blume, they were fighting her books even in the early days. There was one major difference. The difference in those days, it wasn't the government doing it. It were these fringe groups that were doing this. And we were in hand-to-hand combat with all of these different groups, whether it was Anita Bryant, who was trying to keep LGBTQ books, out of bookstores and not being read, or other kind of fringe groups. And Florida, I don't know. I mean, I'd love to see, Sabrina, if you could do some historical work and see if we had those book bannings 20, 30, 40 years ago. I don't really think you would have found them. What's happened in Florida is there's been a perfect storm, a really bad perfect storm. We have a governor and a gerrymandered legislature, the governor's being Ron DeSantis, who have taken on this kind of, quote, culture war as a way for he felt that it could propel him into serious talk of the presidency, right? So they passed some really, really, really horrible laws. And these laws were incredibly vague and incredibly scary. They were so vague and so scary that even today it's having a ripple effect in these school boards that can typically be somewhat conservative, but they weren't conservative to the point of banning books always. But because these laws, which come with criminal penalties and the like, teachers are emptying their classrooms of books. Libraries need to get, approval from the school board as to what they should even have in their school library. It's put a real chilling effect on what is going on in the schools. To give you an example, some of these laws, we have for years done a big, and a DJ, and I'm sure that Candy has too, bringing authors into the schools. And we brought all kinds of authors in. Now, if we're to bring an author into the school, the author and the author's work needs to be vetted and approved by the school board. That had never happened in the past. Even school book fairs parents have to sign a hold harmless agreement with the school system that if their kid brings back a book that they're not happy with, they're not going to sue the school system. This is all, it's kind of like reefer madness. It's this terrible, terrible, chilling, scary effect that has been going on. And, you know, I agree with what Candy said and what DJ was saying. These are not a lot of people. It's just that they're loud. Florida is the home of Moms for Liberty. South Florida is the home of the Proud Boys, right? So they're really loud. They're really, really can be very aggressive. So what happened here in my area in South Florida is 3 books were challenged at a particular K through 8 school. There were 3 basically books that were in the elementary school. One was Amanda Gorman's book, right? The Hill We Climb. 2 of them were picture books. One was the Rio Cortez's ABCs of African American History, and the other was Songs for Langston, about Langston Hughes's poetry. When they did that, and then a group met, the way it works here is a group meets and they decide what to do. So what they decided to do was move all these books into the middle school. So none of these elementary school kids, where it was appropriate, would have access to them. It kind of blew up at that point because it was so apparent what they were trying to do. The woman who challenged them had never read them. She said that Amanda Gorman's book was written by Oprah. I mean, it was really an ugly situation. So the racism involved was so very clear. Now, there had been a lot of groups working, not necessarily specifically on book bannings or in a coordinated way. So we decided, a lot of these groups came to us when this thing blew up and said, all right, we got to do something. So I was racking my brains as to what to do. I thought we'd do a book giveaway. I went to the school for a week to see how we would do it. I'm surprised I didn't get arrested for just hanging out at the school, but there was no real way to do that. So I then took a moment, I said, okay, what is it we as an independent bookstore do best? Well, the best thing we do is convene and put on events. So what we did back in April, I think it was April, is we decided that we were going to push back and do a book giveaway of those 3 books. And we decided to do it at this congregational church that we work with. They call themselves a sanctuary for banned books. They're really remarkable. So we didn't know what would happen. We didn't know how many people would come. We spoke to Amanda Gorman's folks, spoke to Rio's folks, all the publishers backed us up. We found money to buy books. Amanda, to her credit, bought the books of the other 2 people because she wanted to make sure that she wasn't just made out to be the only one who got attention. So we created little bags and we created something that you'll see it. I have a little slide presentation. We started something where we're calling it Freedom, Freadom. And we put them in bags, put little strips on them and said, all right, how many people are going to come to this church? And let me share my screen and I'm going to do my best. If you can see this. Well, wait, I think I have to share my screen first. So let me share it. And I am going to share. Can you guys see my screen? I hope so. And so we started what we called the Freedom Coalition. The Freedom Coalition came out of what we were doing. And I'll show you, I'll take you through this if I can. So what we did is we started this thing called the Freedom Coalition, and we started with all these ancillary groups that have been coming to us. Things like Families Against Banned Books, Moms for Libros. There's something called the Miami Freedom Project. There's Cuban American Women for Democracy. We got everyone together and we said, all right, we're going to do this event at the Coral Gables Congregational Church. And this is what we did. If you can see the photograph above, you can see what happened. We then coordinated with the media because we wanted DeSantis to know that we weren't taking this lying down. Amanda approached Anderson Cooper. We did this event on a Wednesday, and then on a Thursday night, Anderson Cooper had Amanda on, and I'll just play a little of.
In Florida, take a look at this packed event hosted by a bookstore. It's not a book signing. People that were there last night to support former National Youth Poet Laureate Amanda Gorman, who donated 1,200 books to be given out, including 400 copies of her book and 2 other titles restricted at a Miami-Dade County public school for kindergarten through 8th graders. Now, the books are being restricted after one parent's complaint. Gorman's book is titled The Hill We Climb. It's the same title as the poem she read at President Biden's inauguration in 2021 as the youngest inaugural poet in U.S. history. Months later, her book was published and had been available at the school library for all students until one parent's complaint, and by the way, that parent did not actually read the book. Now the school district says only middle school students have access to Amanda Gorman's book. The parent's complaint stated it.
I don't want to go on with it because we don't have a lot of time. But if you can see, we got all kinds of local media. Then we started this whole group came together and we started marching on the school board and being very much a part of what happened. The next meeting at the school board, we tried to fight, and we did somewhat successfully, this banning. So we had people from the various groups come and speak. And then there was Banned Books Week. So we brought everyone together to celebrate Banned Books Week. And we started off with a sermon by Pastor Lori Hafner at the church, at the Sanctuary for Banned Books. And then we did what we called a walk for freedom. And I'll just give you a flavor of what that was like. We went from there to the bookstore.
This is what democracy looks like. Tell me what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. Tell me what freedom looks like. This is what freedom looks like. Tell me what freedom.
So we had about 500 people in this march coming over to the bookstore. Then we held a press conference down in the lower right in the courtyard of our bookstore. And then during Banned Books Week, we really maximized the entire week. Just by chance, Zakiya Harris, who wrote, The Other Black Girl, happened to be in the store. And we did a whole thing on different writers and their banned books. This is a mural that we have called Censorship Leaves Us in the Dark. We even did a comedy unbanned show where these comedians that we've worked with did a whole evening of Lenny Bruce. I do want to play. Then we worked with Penn, and we thanked Penn. We did a panel with Brad Meltzer, Cameron Garrett, and Debbie Goldberg. We did that in an evening, and Cameron said something really quite astonishing that I think is worth playing.
About Black people and about Latino people and about queer people, the ones that are banned most often, and it's because we're treated as an add-on, as an accessory, as something that you can buy into, but you don't have to. And you're treated as you're not as important to the main storyline. And I think that's what I would confront them with. Do they see Black people as real people? Do they see queer people as real people? Do you see me as a full person deserving of stories the way you do, the way you are? Because they're not banning books that center them, so.
Yeah, so she was great, and the whole panel was terrific. And then we went on, but I also want to give you. Then we worked with the New Republic, and they did a banned books tour. We honored teachers and librarians, but then this is what happened in the store. So in the store on that day, a week after Banned Books Week, we had all the groups come and show their wares, and basically set up in the bookstore so other people of the community could join them. And you'll hear someone from the Florida Foundation for Freedom to Read. They are an amazing group, and you'll hear what she says.
Why am I here? I'm here because I am a parent that cares very deeply about us making decisions that are based on education and not caution. We believe in parents' right is for their own child, not everyone else's child, and we should not be limited to the books and the information available in our school. Every child deserves to see their lives reflected in the books that they read, and if it's happening in their world, if they have questions about what's happening in their world, if it's part of their family, they deserve to have access to that information.
So that shoot, they're amazing. They were doing a lot of work in Florida. They're working with Penn. Then we did all this merch. We worked with Moleskine, who created. You could come in, buy a Moleskine, and then you could have a word, whatever word you want. It could be one of the words that George Carlin said you have to keep off TV. It could be anything, or a phrase. So we did that. Then we created these. We created this merch. We did all this merch that people are loving to a large extent, this whole freedom campaign that we've been doing. The amount of attention we got was off the charts. So we spread the word. The Herald asked me to do an op-ed. So the word really got spread. The beautiful upshot of all of this is that this group is still in existence. It's working really, really hard. And we're even going to be running candidates for the school board, because I believe that all of this starts locally. And so all we need to do is flip one seat on the school board to help change the narrative. Because even though the laws are very vague, they can be interpreted any way that the school board really wants it to be interpreted. So we're keeping our pedal to the metal, if that's the right phrase. And it was just so great that out of something so venal and negative, we were able to energize the entire community, so that people in Tallahassee are not thinking that we're taking it lying down. And the only good news I can say is that these culture wars, as DJ pointed out, are not working. You can see what happened in the election just a couple days ago. They are not working. Nobody wants to ban books. And I believe that DeSantis, in Florida at least, is going to lose whatever power he had once he gets bounced out of the campaign. He can only be governor for 2 more years. And I'm hoping that we'll see a lot of reversal of this in a couple of years. But I wanted to give a bit of a hopeful kind of report from the darkness of Florida, that you can fight back. We've had no pushback. We've had nobody targeting us. It's been just all positive, good stuff.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear, Mitchell, and so many great ideas of what people can be doing in their own stores. I know we're 5 minutes over, yes, so
yeah, I'm sorry.
I want to make sure. Oh no, but for such wonderful information, and so I want to make sure.
I'd love to take questions if people want to stay for a little bit.
I know some of us may have to go. I'll leave it up to Siva how to handle that, but I just wanted to take a moment to really thank all of our panelists, but especially our booksellers, for coming and speaking today.